She was just a quiet girl with a backpack and a broken heart. But when she followed a trail of blood into the woods and found a wounded dog gasping for life, she didn't run, she stayed, she fought, and what she uncovered would shake an entire town to its core, exposing secrets buried deep beneath the trees and lighting a fire no one saw coming. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video and tell us where are you watching from. Now let's jump into the story. Elder Pine was the kind of town where stories settled like dust on old shelves, quiet and forgotten, the kind of place where mornings arrived in whispers and nights held their breath. It was hidden in the curve of the Ashdown Hills where pine trees grew taller than the rooftops and fog wrapped itself around every fence post and chimney like an old memory. 7-year-old June Calloway hadn't spoken more than 10 words in the last 6 months. Not since the accident, not since the day her parents' car slid off that rain-slick road and into the river bend. The sound of her mother's laughter had once filled every room of their little home. Now only silence lived there, sometimes broken by the creak of old floorboards or the sigh of wind through the trees. Her Uncle Grant, who took her in after the accident, didn't ask her to speak. He just built things quietly and let her sit near while he worked. He'd lost people too, and that made their silence a kind of understanding that morning. The mist was still clinging to the ground like wet cloth. Grant handed June a small woven basket and said in his soft voice, "See if you can gather some pine cones for the stove." She nodded and walked toward the edge of the woods, her boots crunching softly over wet leaves. She liked the forest. It didn't ask questions. It just breathed. She wandered deeper than usual, letting the fog guide her steps. Birds sang somewhere above, but the trees swallowed the sound. Then she saw it, a small red smear on a gray rock. She frowned and stepped closer. There was another mark on a leaf. Then another across a low branch. Blood, not old and brown, but fresh and dark. Her feet slowed. Something about the way it painted the ground made her chest feel heavy. The deeper she went, the more it appeared. Streaks across bark, splashes on roots, then through the low ferns and fallen branches. She saw him, a dog. He was huge, bigger than any dog she'd seen in town. His fur was thick but torn, black and brown mixed with red and mud. He lay on his side, chest rising and falling. In uneven gasps, one of his ears was shredded, and his eyes were half shut. The collar around his neck was thick and rusted, so tight it had nearly disappeared into his skin. June stopped breathing. She felt her heart pounding against her ribs. But she didn't run. The dog didn't growl or bark. He didn't move except for a small flicker of his tail. He looked tired, like something that had run too far for too long. She stepped closer, her small hands trembling as she dropped the basket. Kneeling beside him slowly, she reached out and touched the side of his muzzle. Warm and sticky with dried blood, the dog whimpered, his good eye opening a little more. "You're not scary," she whispered, her voice rough and small from lack of use. "You're just hurting." The words felt strange in the air, like forgotten music. She didn't know where the courage came from, but it was there, sitting in her chest, steady and warm. She couldn't leave him. He was broken and alone. Like her, nearby, half covered by moss, was a torn piece of canvas from what looked like an old hunter's blind. June pulled it free, dragging it across the forest floor with all her strength. She rolled the dog gently onto it, grunting with the effort he let her, barely lifting his head, as if he already trusted her somehow, using long fallen branches. She tied the tarp corners into a sled, the knots sloppy but strong. She wrapped one end around her shoulders and leaned forward. Her boots dug into the soft ground, and she pulled. The forest didn't help her. The roots caught her feet, the hills pushed back. The trail twisted like it was trying to turn around, but she didn't stop, not once. She dragged him mile after mile, sweat pouring down her back, arms burning with every step. The dog, who she had already named Rusty in her mind, let out quiet groans, but he didn't fight her. He just looked at her, tired but calm. Hours passed. The trees thinned. And just as the sky turned gold and the shadows grew long, an old green pickup skidded around a bend on the gravel road, brakes squealing. The door flung open and Grant came running. "June!" he shouted, voice cracking as he dropped to his knees. She was collapsed beside the dog, tangled in branches and mud, her cheeks stained with dirt and streaks of dried blood. He lifted her into his arms, panicked and wide-eyed. "What happened?" Her voice came out like wind, soft but certain. "Help him." Then everything went dark as she passed out against his chest. Grant didn't waste a second. He scooped up the tarp with Rusty still on it and loaded them both into the back of the truck, tires spitting gravel as they roared toward town. In the rearview mirror, June's hand rested against Rusty's side. Even in sleep, she hadn't let go. The tires skidded into the gravel lot outside Elder Pine Animal Clinic, just as the last light of the sun dipped behind the hills. Grant jumped out, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. He yanked the truck's tailgate open and pulled the tarp toward him. The dog's breathing was ragged now, slower than before, and June was still out cold in the passenger seat, her hand hanging limply from the window, still stained with blood. And Leaves' clinic door swung open before he could knock. Dr. Marion Blake stood in the doorway, her hair tied up, sleeves already rolled. She was tough as bark and twice as sharp. "On the table now," she barked, moving fast toward the back room. Grant hesitated. "The girl too," he said, voice tight. "She passed out on the way." Marion waved toward the second table. "I'll get her juice and a blanket. Start with the dog. What happened to him?" Grant just shook his head, still catching his breath. "She found him, dragged him miles, wouldn't let go." Marion leaned over the dog, her gloved hands moving fast, parting the blood-matted fur, eyes narrowing at the deep wounds. "These aren't wild injuries," she muttered. "These were made by teeth, a lot of them, over and over." She clipped away fur, applied pressure to stop the bleeding, started fluids, and called out instructions to her assistant. The clinic filled with movement and tension. June stirred on the table next to them, eyes fluttering open, the blanket already tucked around her, a juice box on the tray nearby. She sat up slowly, blinking at the lights. "Rusty," she whispered. Marion looked up. "You gave him a name, June." Nodded, her voice clearer than it had been in months. "He's not a thing, he's Rusty." The vet paused for a second, then smiled gently. "Rusty it is." The dog didn't move, but he was breathing, shallow and steady. Hooked up to lines and monitors, Marion leaned close. "He shouldn't be alive," she said softly. "But somehow he is." Grant leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching both of them. He couldn't remember the last time he saw June speak with such surety. Not since her parents were gone, and now here she was, defending a broken animal with a strength she hadn't shown in months. Night settled in outside the windows, the clinic. Lights casting soft glows on the pale walls. June wouldn't leave Rusty's side. Every time Marion checked the machines, June's eyes followed her, silent and steady. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. Grant stood immediately, heart jumping in his chest. He wasn't expecting anyone. Marion paused mid-stitch, eyes darting to the front lobby. "You expecting visitors?" she asked. Grant shook his head and moved to where the door. A man stood outside, tall, with graying hair and a flannel shirt too neat for this late hour. His smile was polite but cold, like someone used to hiding things behind charm. "Evening," he said casually. "Heard a big dog was brought in tonight. Just curious. Might belong to one of my workers." Grant didn't open the door all the way, just enough to speak. "You're out late for curiosity." The man shrugged. "Small towns, word travels quick. Thought I'd check." Behind the frosted glass, Rusty's ears twitched. Then he growled, low and quiet. June placed her hand on his paw, and he still had. Grant studied the man's face. There was something too smooth about his tone, too rehearsed. "Clinic's closed," Grant said. "File a report with the sheriff in the morning." The man tipped his hat. "Of course, just trying to help." As he walked away, Grant watched closely. Something about the way the man moved made his skin crawl, like he wasn't just curious but hunting for something. And when the man turned the corner, Grant noticed it, just a flash, a glint in his eye that didn't match his words inside. Marion returned to stitching Rusty's side. June watched her every move, her hand never leaving the dog's fur. He knew him, June said. Quietly, the man at the door. Rusty growled before he even saw him. Marion glanced at Grant, her hands not stopping. You think he's the one who did this? Grant's jaw tightened. I think he knows who did. The hours passed slow and heavy. The machines beeped steadily, and the wind outside began to howl through the trees. The clinic felt like the only warm place in a town full of shadows when dawn came, soft and gold across the frost-tipped windows. Rusty's eyes opened slowly, not wide, just enough to see, to know. June gasped and leaned in. Hey, she whispered. You stayed. Marion stepped closer and checked his vitals. Her voice hushed with wonder. He really shouldn't have made it through the night. But here he is. Rusty's eyes moved to June. Then to Grant, then Marion, and he didn't flinch, he didn't growl. He just breathed in slow and deep. Like he finally felt safe. June placed her forehead gently against his and whispered, You don't have to be scared anymore. No one in. The room said anything for a long time. They just watched him rest, not as a fighter, not as a victim, but as something else now, something that belonged to Aunt June, who had once gone days without a sound, sat by Rusty's side and spoke again, soft and sure. You're mine now, and I'm yours. The days that followed were filled with whispers, not just in the town but in June's own home. Grant noticed the same old truck circling the street more than once, the same man who came to the clinic, now showing up at the gas station, leaning too long on the counter at the feed store, pretending to be friendly while his eyes searched the shadows. Rusty was healing slowly, but his wounds reopened every time he heard a door slam or footsteps. On the porch, the growl in his chest would rise like thunder. Low and dangerous. June stayed close to him, sleeping on the floor beside his bed, reading from books, drawing pictures of dogs that could fly or wear capes. Her smile was slow to return, but it came back a little more each time Rusty lifted his head or wagged his tail one morning, while the kettle hissed on the stove and frost curled at the corners of the windows. June came down the stairs with a backpack on her shoulders and a map in her hand. We have to go, she said softly. They're coming. Grant turned from the window, his face pale in the quiet light. Go where? He asked. And June unfolded the map her mother once gave her, pointing to a circle drawn in fading ink. The cabin beyond the creek. Mom showed me before. She said if things ever felt wrong, that's where we'd be safe. Grant stared at the mark, remembering that place, deep in the woods. No road signs, no power lines, only overgrown paths. And trees that leaned in close. He nodded slowly. You think you can find it? June met his eyes. I know the way. That afternoon, Grant loaded the truck with food and supplies, driving into town on purpose so he'd be seen, while June and Rusty slipped into the forest behind the house, their shapes swallowed quickly. By trees and mist, her boots crunched softly over old pine needles. Rusty limped at her side, but stayed close, ears twitching at every sound. They crossed the narrow creek, where water shimmered cold and quick, climbed over fallen logs and ducked under branches heavy with moss. The path grew thinner, the trees thicker, but June moved like she belonged there, leading them forward, always forward. As dusk fell, and the forest turned silver with fading light, they reached the cabin, tucked between leaning alders and shadowed pines. Its roof sagging, its windows dusty but whole. June pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside, Rusty behind her. The air was thick with dust and old memories. The fireplace still held ashes from years ago, and her mother's old wool blanket was folded on the shelf. Rusty limped to the center of the room and lay down with a tired sigh, his body shaking slightly. June knelt beside him and opened her pack, pulling out gauze and the small first aid kit Dr. Marion had given her. Her hands were steady now. The fear had turned into something else. Something firm like purpose outside. The forest was still, the only sound the soft rustle of branches in the wind. But then, a crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig. June froze, her hand gripping the iron fire poker resting near the hearth. Shadows moved beyond the window, then a voice. June, it called, smooth and quiet. Don't be afraid. I just want the dog, he's mine. June crouched lower. Rusty growled behind her. Too weak to stand but not silent, the voice came again. You don't understand, he's trained. Valuable, I raised him, he knows me. She didn't believe a word. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She peeked through the crack in the door and saw him, the man from the clinic, Tom Lancer, standing on the porch like he owned the place. Two others behind him with flashlights and cold eyes, their hands on something heavy hanging at their belts. Come on out now, Tom said. Let's not make this hard. The door handle jiggled. June gripped the poker tighter. Her whole body tense. The door burst open. Tom stepped in, sneering. What do you think you're going to do with that, little girl? Before she could answer, a voice cut through the room like lightning. She doesn't have to. Grant stood behind him, rifle raised, eyes sharp. His voice was low but filled with fire. Get away from my niece. Tom turned, startled. Whoa now. No need for trouble, he said, hands raised. This is just a misunderstanding. From the trees, red and blue lights flashed suddenly through the dark, sirens low but steady. Sheriff Helen Mars stepped from behind a pine, her badge catching the light. Drop your weapons, she ordered. The men behind Tom hesitated, then let their flashlights fall to the floor. Tom stood still, jaw clenched. That dog is mine, he growled. He belongs to me. No, June said clearly, stepping forward. He chose me. In a blur, Tom lunged forward, and Rusty, with one final burst of strength, pushed off the ground and leapt between them. His body slammed into Tom's chest, knocking him back onto the floor. Grant stepped forward, pressing the barrel of his rifle to Tom's neck, his hand steady. Sheriff Mars moved quickly, snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. You're under arrest for cruelty, trespassing, and endangering a child. Tom spit into the dirt. That mud is broken. Anyway. June dropped to Rusty's side, wrapping her arms around his neck. His body shook, blood soaking through fresh bandages. Stay with me, she whispered. Please stay. Grant knelt beside her, his voice low and urgent. We've called Marion. She'll be ready. We're going to get him help. As deputies led the men into cruisers, June refused to leave Rusty's side. She rode in the back seat holding him, whispering every story she knew. The ones her mother told her at bedtime. The ones she made up on her own. Rusty didn't move, not much. But when she said, "You're not what they made you," his tail gave the softest, weakest thump against the seat end. That was enough. The rain fell softly on the roof of Elder Pine Clinic as the night settled in. Everything inside was quiet, except for the gentle beep of the machines and the hum of the heater blowing through the vents. Rusty lay on the metal table, wrapped in a clean blanket, his breathing shallow but steady. Beside him sat June, her small hand resting on his paw, her eyes red but calm. She hadn't left his side in 2 days. Marion moved around them quietly, checking the monitors, adjusting the 4 lines, whispering things under her breath. His fever is high, she told Grant, who stood near the door, but he's fighting. That dog's been through things most can't imagine, and yet here he is. Grant looked toward June, then back at Rusty. And she's still here too, he said. They're both fighters. The sheriff returned that morning with news no one expected. She laid a file on the counter and said, "It's bigger than any of us thought." Her voice was tight, her jaw set. Tom Lancer wasn't just hurting animals. He was part of a ring moving stolen dogs across states. Some from shelters, others from police kennels. Marion's hand froze over the clipboard. "Police dogs?" she asked quietly. The sheriff nodded. Rusty was one of them. June looked up, her fingers still on Rusty's fur. "What was his name?" she asked as sheriff opened the folder, pointing to a line of records. They called him Ranger back then. He was trained for search and rescue. Then he vanished during a transfer 2 years ago. June didn't say anything for a long time. Then she leaned close to the dog and whispered, "Rusty or Ranger, he's still mine." Dr. Marion gave a soft smile. "Then that's his real name now." As the days passed, the news spread across Elder Pine and beyond. People came to the clinic to leave flowers, cards, warm blankets, even toys for Rusty. Children from the local school wrote letters with crayon drawings of dogs and capes. One note said, "Dear Rusty, thank you for being brave, love Noah." Outside, a fence was being built behind Grant's house, strong posts and wide gates. Inside it would be a place for dogs who needed healing. A place June later named the brave field. Rusty's strength returned slowly. Day by day, his eyes grew clearer, his tail wagged a little stronger, and one afternoon, as June sat beside him reading a story about forest animals, he stood up for the first time since the attack. His legs shaky but determined. June gasped and threw her arms around him. "You did it," she whispered. "I knew you could." The sheriff returned a week later with a visitor, a man in uniform with tired eyes and a badge that read Officer Dan Moore. He knelt down and said, "I trained this dog. I called him Ranger. We thought he was gone for good." June stood in front of Rusty, her chin lifted. "You're not taking him," she said softly. The officer raised his hands. "I'm not here to take him. I just wanted to say thank you, both of you. What you did helped bring down something terrible. You gave him a second chance. And you gave others hope." Grant stepped forward, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "He's not going back into service, not anymore. He deserves peace." The officer nodded, his voice thick. "He found his home. I can see that." Weeks turned into months, and Rusty became more than just a survivor. He became a symbol. June and Grant built a small red barn on the edge of their land, with soft lighting and warm straw, a place for rescued animals to rest. The town called it the Hope House, and every Saturday, children from around Elder Pine would gather there to read to the animals and listen to June's stories. June, once silent and afraid, now stood in front of crowds with her hand resting gently on Rusty's back. She would tell them how she found him, how they saved each other, and how being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you don't give up one day. She was invited to speak at a nearby school. Grant drove her there in the truck, Rusty in the back seat with his head out the window, the wind in his fur. When they arrived, children rushed out to greet them, pointing and whispering, "That's the dog from the news." June smiled, lifted her chin and said, "His name is Rusty, and he's not just from the news. He's my best friend." Inside the classroom, she stood at the front holding a picture book while Rusty lay calmly by her feet. When she finished reading, there was a quiet moment. Then the room erupted in claps and cheers. That night, back at home, June sat under the stars with Rusty's head in her lap, the fire crackling nearby. Grant poured cocoa into 2 mugs and sat beside them. "You ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "The mayor's coming to see the new barn." June nodded, scratching behind Rusty's ears. "We're going to show him what brave looks like." Grant smiled. "Your mom would be proud." June looked up at the stars, her voice soft. "I think she knows." Rusty gave a soft bark, his tail sweeping the ground, and June laughed, a sound full of light and life. "He thinks so too." And somewhere deep in the woods of Elder Pine, where pain had once lived in silence, a girl and a dog built something new. Not out of what was broken, but out of everything they became together, strong, gentle, and brave.